We have lived on this land since the rivers ran free. We cannot simply leave.
This land belongs to the railroad now, old man. You have until sundown.
The cowboy thought he was finally leaving the Apache lands alive, until the chief stopped him with one shocking command. "Marry my daughter, or never return here again." The entire tribe fell silent. Warriors stared. Elders lowered their heads. Because everyone knew the truth about the chief's daughter, she had been rejected by every man in the tribe for years. The cowboy slowly turned toward the girl, and what he saw completely caught him off guard. She wasn't dangerous. She wasn't cursed. And the secret hidden behind her silence was about to change his life forever. What happened next shocked the entire tribe, and no one could believe the cowboy's final decision. The desert stretched endlessly beneath the burning afternoon sun. Heat shimmered across the sand while dry wind swept through the rocky hills of Arizona Territory. A lone cowboy rode slowly between narrow canyon walls, his horse weak from exhaustion and thirst. The cowboy's name was Ethan Cole. Dust covered his hat, his clothes, and even the old rifle strapped to his saddle. His canteen held only a few drops of water. For 3 days, Ethan had traveled alone through dangerous land where few settlers dared to enter. People in nearby towns warned him never to cross Apache territory alone. Some claimed warriors watched every canyon from the shadows. Others said outsiders vanished there without a trace. Ethan never paid much attention to stories. He had spent most of his life moving from one frontier town to another, taking whatever work he could find. Cattle drives, hunting jobs, and guarding supply wagons were enough to keep a man alive. But now survival itself was becoming difficult. His horse suddenly slowed to a stop. Ethan looked up carefully. 6 Apache warriors stood on the ridge above him. Their faces were calm and unreadable. Some carried bows while others held rifles across their backs. The late sunlight painted long shadows behind them as they stared down at the stranger below. Ethan slowly raised his hands away from his revolver. "I am not looking for trouble," he called out. No one answered. One warrior rode down from the ridge. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and younger than the others. His sharp eyes studied Ethan carefully before stopping on the nearly empty canteen hanging from the saddle. "You cross Apache land," the warrior finally said. Ethan nodded once. "Looks that way." The warrior's expression did not change. "Many men do not leave this land alive." Ethan glanced at the other riders surrounding him. "I figured that out already." For a moment silence filled the canyon except for the sound of wind moving through the rocks. Then the warrior pointed deeper into the desert. "You come with us." Ethan knew he had little choice. The Apache riders surrounded him as they traveled through winding trails hidden between cliffs. Hours passed before smoke finally appeared in the distance. Beyond the canyon rested an Apache village protected by tall stone walls and narrow paths. Children ran between tents while women carried buckets and prepared food near cooking fires. But something felt wrong immediately. The people looked tired, weak, thin. Many children sat quietly beside empty water barrels. Even the animals appeared exhausted. As Ethan entered the camp, silent eyes followed him everywhere. Some villagers looked curious while others looked angry. A few warriors rested hands near their weapons as he passed. The young warrior led Ethan toward the center of the village where an older man stood beside a fire. The man wore simple clothing decorated with beads and eagle feathers. Deep lines marked his face, and long gray hair rested across his shoulders. Though older, his presence carried strength and authority. The young warrior spoke first. "Chief Nantan, we found him crossing the eastern canyon." The chief looked at Ethan for a long moment before speaking. "You travel alone." "I always do," Ethan answered. Chief Nantan noticed the empty canteen hanging beside the saddle. "You search for water?" Ethan hesitated before nodding. "Seems everybody is." For the first time, a shadow crossed the chief's face. "Our river died 3 weeks ago," Nantan said quietly. "Now the desert tests us." Ethan looked around the struggling village once more. Mothers gave children tiny amounts of water from clay cups. Several elders sat weakly beside the fires. Even the warriors looked exhausted. The tribe was suffering badly. And deep inside, Ethan suddenly remembered another dry summer long ago when his own family had prayed for rain that never came. The sun disappeared behind the cliffs as darkness slowly covered the Apache village. Small fires flickered across the camp while families gathered quietly for the evening meal. The smell of smoke drifted through the cool desert air, but despite the peaceful night, tension remained everywhere Ethan looked. No one trusted him. Several warriors watched him closely while he sat near the fire outside the chief's tent. The younger warrior who captured him earlier stood nearby with his arms crossed, his sharp eyes filled with suspicion. Ethan finally broke the silence. "You got a name?" The warrior answered after a pause. "Takoda." "Well, Takoda," Ethan said calmly, "if your people wanted me dead, I figure I would already be buried in the desert." Takoda did not smile. Perhaps the chief is still deciding. Before Ethan could answer, the entrance to the chief's tent opened. Chief Nantan stepped outside slowly and motioned for Ethan to follow him. Inside the tent, the air felt cooler. Old blankets covered the ground, and several clay bowls filled with herbs rested near a small lantern. Maps and animal carvings hung beside traditional weapons along the walls. Nantan sat across from Ethan near the lantern flame. "You have traveled many deserts?" the chief asked. "A few." "Then perhaps you understand suffering." Ethan looked down quietly. "More than I'd like." For a moment neither man spoke. Then Nantan reached for a wooden cup and poured the last bit of water from a clay jug into it. Instead of drinking it himself, he handed it to Ethan. Ethan frowned. "Your people need this more than me." "You are a guest," Nantan replied. Ethan accepted the cup slowly but only took a small sip before setting it down. The chief noticed. That seemed to matter to him. Outside, distant coughing echoed through the village. A child began crying somewhere in the darkness. Nantan lowered his eyes. "2 children became sick this morning," he said quietly. "If we do not find water soon, more will follow." Ethan stared at the flickering lantern flame. Years earlier, during a terrible drought in Texas, his younger sister Sarah had died from thirst before help arrived. He still remembered how weak her voice sounded near the end. Some memories never left a man. Finally, Ethan looked up. "There may be underground springs hidden in the canyon rock," he said. "Birds sometimes circle near them at sunrise." Takoda stepped inside the tent suddenly after overhearing the conversation. "You trust this outsider too easily," he warned the chief. Nantan remained calm. "Do you have another solution?" Takoda stayed silent. The chief turned back to Ethan. "If you help my people find water, the Apache will remember it." Ethan nodded once. "I'll help." The next morning, Ethan traveled into the desert with Takoda and 2 Apache scouts. The heat became brutal before midday. They searched dry riverbeds, narrow cliffs, and deep canyons, but every water source had turned to dust. Hours passed with no luck. Takoda grew more irritated with every step. "You waste our time," he snapped. Ethan ignored him and continued scanning the cliffs ahead. Then he noticed movement in the sky. A small group of birds circled low near a rocky canyon wall. Ethan immediately pointed toward them. "There." The Apache scouts exchanged uncertain looks, but Ethan climbed down from his horse and moved toward the rocks. Kneeling beside the canyon wall, he pressed his hand against the dirt. Cool moisture. His heartbeat quickened. "Help me dig." Takoda looked doubtful, but the scouts joined Ethan. Together they cleared rocks and dry soil from the base of the canyon wall. For several long minutes nothing happened. Then suddenly wet mud appeared beneath the surface. One scout shouted excitedly. They dug faster. Without warning, a stream of muddy water burst through the rocks and spilled into the sand below. The Apache scouts stared in disbelief. Takoda himself looked stunned. Fresh water continued flowing from the hidden spring as the men quickly filled their empty containers. For the first time since arriving in the village, Ethan heard laughter. By sunset, the entire Apache camp gathered around the water barrels with relief and joy spreading across every face. Children smiled again. Families embraced each other. Even exhausted elders lifted their heads with gratitude. Chief Nantan approached Ethan before the celebration fire. "You saved my people," he said. But before Ethan could answer, movement near the edge of the crowd caught his attention. A young woman stood alone beside the shadows of a nearby tent. Part of her face carried a deep burn scar. While the rest of the village celebrated, she remained completely alone. And strangely, everyone avoided looking at her. The celebration lasted long into the night. Drums echoed through the canyon while children laughed around the fires. Women carried fresh water through the village with smiles that had been missing for weeks. Even the older warriors seemed lighter now that hope had returned to the camp. But Ethan could not stop thinking about the young woman standing alone in the shadows. While everyone else celebrated together, she remained distant from the crowd with her eyes lowered toward the ground. And nobody went near her. Ethan watched quietly as several children ran toward her happily. She smiled softly at them and handed one little girl a small carved wooden horse from her pocket. The children clearly liked her. Yet when one of the mothers noticed them nearby, she quickly pulled the children away. The woman with the scar pretended not to notice. Something about that troubled Ethan deeply. He turned toward one of the older Apache men sitting near the fire. "Who is she?" The elder hesitated before answering. "That is Ayanna, Chief Nanton's daughter." Ethan looked surprised. "The chief's daughter?" The old man nodded slowly. "But many believe sadness follows her." Before Ethan could ask another question, drums suddenly stopped across the camp. Chief Nantan stood beside the largest fire at the center of the village. The tribe slowly gathered around him until silence spread through the canyon once again. The chief raised his hand toward Ethan. "Tonight we honor the man who saved our people." Several villagers nodded respectfully. Others remained uncertain. Nantan continued speaking. "Our tribe was dying. This stranger entered our land and gave life back to our children. A debt like this cannot be ignored." Ethan shifted uncomfortably beside the fire. "Chief, I did not help for a reward." But Nantan continued as if he had not heard him. "Ayanna," the chief called softly. The young woman stepped forward slowly from the edge of the crowd. Whispers spread immediately among the villagers. Ayanna kept her eyes lowered while she stood beside her father. The firelight revealed the scar across one side of her face more clearly now. It stretched from her cheek toward her jaw, evidence of terrible burns from long ago. Chief Nantan looked directly at Ethan. "You will marry my daughter." The entire village froze. Even the fire seemed quieter. Ethan stared at the chief in complete disbelief. "I beg your pardon." Takoda stepped forward instantly with anger burning in his eyes. "Chief, this is madness." Nantan ignored him. "You saved my people," the chief said firmly. "Now you will give honor back to my daughter." Ayanna closed her eyes as though she wished to disappear completely. Ethan struggled to find words. "Chief, I barely know her." "No man here will take her as wife," Nantan replied. "They believe the fire marked her with bad fortune." The villagers lowered their heads awkwardly. One elderly woman finally spoke from the crowd. "Years ago, Ayanna ran into a burning tent to save children trapped inside." Ethan looked at Ayanna again. "The children survived," the woman continued softly. "But Ayanna was badly burned." Another villager muttered quietly, "After that came drought, sickness, failed hunts." Takoda crossed his arms coldly. "Many believe the spirits turned against her." Ethan felt anger rising in his chest. "She saved children," he said sharply. "And for that she became an outcast." No one answered him. Ayanna finally lifted her eyes toward Ethan for the first time. Pain filled them. Not anger. Not bitterness. Just years of loneliness. Chief Nantan stepped closer. "I am old," he said quietly. "When I die, she will have nobody." The words hung heavily in the night air. Ethan suddenly understood something important. This was not simply about tradition. This was a father terrified for his daughter's future. Takoda pointed toward Ethan angrily. "He is an outsider. He will leave her like everyone else." Ayanna lowered her eyes again as though she expected those words to become true. Ethan looked around the village. At the frightened people. At the exhausted chief. At the young woman everyone had abandoned despite her courage. And suddenly he remembered his own years wandering alone after losing his family. He knew what loneliness could do to a person. The chief spoke one final time. "Marry my daughter or leave Apache land before sunrise." Silence covered the camp. Every eye turned toward Ethan. For several long moments nobody moved. Then Ethan looked directly at Ayanna and spoke calmly. "I will marry her." Gasps spread across the crowd. Dakota's face darkened with fury. Ayanna herself looked stunned. But Ethan was not finished. "I will not marry her because of debt," he said firmly. "I will marry her because no person deserves to live forgotten." The wedding took place the following morning beneath the rising desert sun. Apache elders formed a quiet circle around Ethan and Ayanna while smoke from burning herbs drifted gently through the cool air. The ceremony was simple, yet the tension surrounding it could be felt across the entire village. Some people watched with curiosity, others with anger. Dakota stood near the edge of the crowd with a cold expression that never changed once during the ceremony. Ayanna barely spoke afterward. Even while women prepared food for the celebration meal, she remained distant and quiet beside the fire. That evening, Ethan finally sat beside her outside the chief's tent. "You regret this already?" he asked lightly. Ayanna gave a faint smile but looked away toward the cliffs. "You should not have tied your life to mine." Ethan studied her carefully. "You really believe you bring bad luck?" She stayed silent for a moment. "After the fire, people changed," she whispered. "Every bad season became my fault. Every death. Every storm. You saved children. That does not matter to fear." Her words stayed with Ethan long after darkness covered the camp. Later that night, unable to sleep, Ethan noticed movement near the supply tents. A shadow slipped quietly between the fires carrying sacks of food toward the outer canyon. Ethan followed silently. The figure moved quickly through the rocks before suddenly stopping near the cliffs. "You can come out now," a familiar voice said coldly. Dakota stepped from the shadows holding a rifle. Ethan frowned. "Stealing from your own people." Dakota's eyes burned with anger. "You do not understand this tribe." "Then explain it." Dakota moved closer. "For years Chief Nantan has ruled with weakness. He listens to old stories while our enemies grow stronger. And now he places faith in an outsider and a cursed daughter." Ethan shook his head. "Ayanna is not cursed. You say that because you do not know the truth." Dakota pointed toward the distant mountains. "There are men beyond those hills willing to help me take control of this tribe." Ethan's expression hardened instantly. "You betrayed your own people." Dakota lifted the rifle slightly. "I will save them." Before Ethan could react, the sound of gunfire exploded from the direction of the village. Both men turned sharply. Smoke rose into the night sky. Screams echoed through the canyon. The camp was under attack. Dakota slowly smiled. "They have arrived." Chaos filled the Apache village as armed riders stormed through the canyon under the cover of darkness. Fires spread quickly between tents while terrified families rushed to protect their children. Ethan grabbed a fallen rifle and fought beside the Apache warriors as bullets echoed across the rocks. In the middle of the battle, Ayanna helped lead frightened children toward safety near the cliffs. Even with danger surrounding her, she refused to leave anyone behind. Then Ethan saw Dakota riding beside the attackers. The betrayal shocked the entire tribe. Chief Nantan confronted him near the center of the burning camp. "You betrayed your own blood," the old chief said with pain in his voice. Dakota answered coldly, "You chose weakness over strength." Before Dakota could raise his weapon, Ethan tackled him from his horse. The two men fought violently in the dirt until Apache warriors finally restrained Dakota and drove the remaining attackers from the canyon. By sunrise, the battle was over. The village still stood. And for the first time in many years, the tribe looked at Ayanna differently. Not with fear or blame, but with respect. Later that morning, Ethan prepared his horse near the edge of camp. Ayanna lowered her eyes sadly. "You are leaving now." Ethan smiled softly and removed his saddle instead. "No," he said. "I think I finally found a place worth staying." The desert wind moved gently across the canyon as silence slowly returned to the Apache village. Smoke from the last dying fires rose into the morning sky, carrying away the memory of fear and conflict. Ethan stood beside Ayanna near the cliffs, watching the sun climb over the horizon. For the first time in a long while, the land did not feel empty to him. It felt like home. Iona glanced at him quietly. People here do not forget easily. Ethan nodded. Neither do I. A small, uncertain smile formed on her face. Not because everything was perfect, but because something had finally begun to change. Behind them, the village continued rebuilding. Children laughed again. Warriors spoke without anger. And for the first time, Iona no longer stood alone in the shadows. Ethan looked out over the desert one last time before turning away. Some journeys end where others finally begin. If you enjoyed this story, like, share, and comment what you think happens next. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful frontier stories like this one.